Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we have a highly requested video on the docket, and that is, of course, the Druhkari Reaper's Wager tier list. So the reason I'm redoing this is because Harlequins got a big rework with the Codex, and this has made them much better into a variety of targets. So that means that Reaper's Wager is going to be a little bit more interesting. We're going to see people using more Quinn units because Quinn units are just straight up better in a lot of cases. They offer more utility, more damage, and more value overall. And in some cases, more durability. So we are going to be also kind of including the buffs that the Druhkari got with the buff to Kabalite Warriors and Witches in this tier list as well. And, kind of taking a look at the overall meta and seeing where Druhkari fit in, especially the Reaper Wager detachment, which I believe to be the best detachment in the Dark Eldar at the moment. And of course, for you guys who don't know, whenever I say Dark Eldar, this is an old brain kind of thing, but Druhkari used to be called Dark Eldar, for you guys that don't know. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Now, my first unit is going to be the Raider. And the Raider, ladies and gentlemen, is a great transport. It's fairly cheap, only costs 80 points, can auto-advance 6, and in certain detachments, you can move it and then disembark, like in the Sky Splinter Assault detachment. So, the Raider is going to be an A-tier unit. It's a staple in the Dark Eldar army. It's used to transport Kabalite Warriors, and, having firing deck makes it so that you can just target the Raider with the stratagem, and all the weapons inside shooting get the benefit. So it is really good. It's good in Reaper's Wager, it's good in Real Space Raid, and it's good in Sky Splinter. So there you have it. It's good in all three detachments. So that's going to go in A tier. Otherwise, though, it's pretty much a paper transport. It will die to Mo shooting, and, you have to really rely on tricks to keep it alive, or just simply admit that it's going to die as soon as it drops off its cargo. But, at 80 points, it's cheap enough to sacrifice. Okay, next up is the Archon. Archon is S tier. You need one of these in probably all of your lists, at least one Archon. He gives you the basically the aura of -1 CP for enemy units using stratagems within his range, which is really powerful. And on top of that, he's pretty good in melee as well. He has a number of enhancements that make him stronger. In Reaper's Wager, giving him sustained or lethal hits is really strong against infantry units. And being able to power up a unit and reroll hits and wounds is insane. You put this guy with Incubi, you put this guy with a Court of the Archon, and he is doing some immense damage to whatever he hits. Also, in certain detachments, you can make him immune to Overwatch, like in Reaper's Wager. You can make him immune to Overwatch via a stratagem, or in, your, classic Sky Splinter Assault, you can make him immune to Overwatch when he gets out of a transport with the Nightmare Shroud. So, even though he's very fragile, he is very much protected against Overwatch in most cases. And his 2+ invul save Shadow Field is pretty insane when it just keeps rolling 2+. Of course, if you do roll that 1 right away, he's very squishy. But other than that, he's a pretty durable character. So, I think he's 85 points, which is nothing for what you get for this guy. It's a steal, and I think he definitely belongs in an S tier. Next up is Court of the Archon. Court of the Archon is a little bit strange. I had to try it myself to see how good it was, because on paper, really doesn't look that great on paper. It looks like just a lot of different things that don't work well together. But as a matter of fact, they actually do work really well together if you have the patience to actually roll the attacks separately for each member of the court. Now, this is something I haven't done in previous videos, but in the Reaper's Wager, I actually think this unit is probably one of the better ones because it gets fights first, which is insane in this kind of meta of combat. You don't have to rely on Lilith for your fights first. So I'm going to put this unit in S tier just because of the meta itself. The meta is very combat oriented, and having the ability to fights first with your Archon and the unit that you join is extremely strong. So you're going to obviously join Kabalite Warriors with this combo, And this makes the Kabalite Warriors shooting better because it also gives lethal hits to the unit and gives it fights first. And it's a very powerful, just in general, very powerful combat unit. So absolutely an S tier unit in my honest opinion, especially in Reaper's Wager. I think it's a really good one. Okay, next up is Reavers. Reavers are a little bit odd. I don't think they're that good because, you know, they have been increased slightly in points. I think they got increased to 65 points or 70 points, excuse me. I still think they're okay, but I don't think they're like auto-include or anything. And I know some people might disagree with me on this. They are a good unit, don't get me wrong, but I think Reaper's Wager really favors, you know, combat-oriented units, and this unit really isn't good at combat. It's really not that good at shooting. It's really more of an objective style unit, and I think there's just better options in the Druhkari roster for about the same cost. You have Mandrakes, for example, who are very good at scoring objectives, and you have other units that you can split up, you know, units of 5 witches here and there. They're usually good enough to score you secondaries, and I just don't feel like Reaper's Wager really benefits a lot from these in general. So I put these in B tier. I mean, again, I think they're good. I like Reavers. I just don't think any army wants, you know, multiple units of them. I was a big fan of these in the old Yunari index. Unfortunately, in Yunari, you know, that's way different now. Things have changed. So, you know, they're decent in the Yunari detachment. But in the Druhkari detachment, I just don't think they're that good. So, you know, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I think they're an okay objective unit that does a little bit of damage, and that's about it. So I'm going to put them in B tier. Next, we have Yurian. Now, personally, Yurian is a model that I have never gotten to work for me. He just doesn't work for me. I don't know why. He just seems to do nothing. His Casket of Flensing seems to just whiff every time I use him. To me, he's performed garbage, but I understand why he's good. I think he's 80 points, which is pretty cheap, or 85 points for a model that can resurrect himself. You know, compared to the new Fuegan, which is only 120, he seems pretty lackluster comparatively, but, you know, we are comparing him to a Phoenix Lord, so there is that. And honestly, he's just okay. I would put him, if it was up to me, I'd put him in B tier, but I know people like using him. And so, like, he's probably in between A and B. I'm going to put him above Reavers here, but he is going to be worse than your, you know, army staples, in my opinion, which are going to be the A and S tier. So in case you guys are wondering how I rank these, B tier units are units that are situational. You know, they're good in certain ways, but, you know, they're not units that you absolutely need in your list. A tier units are going to be your army staples, and S tier units are going to be your standout units. They're going to be your units that are just really good that your whole list revolves around using. Okay, so Yurian Rakarth, B tier. Honestly, not really a huge fan of him, and I think actually in Reaper's Wager, he's probably not that useful. Moving on to Talos. Talos are going to be S tier, guys. They are really good in Reaper's Wager with that -1 to wound stratagem. They're really tough, and they're already pretty tough as it is. They're cheap. They give you Haywire, which is anti-vehicle, which is something your army really desperately needs. The reason why the Druhkari are not doing well right now, competitively speaking, for most players, besides, you know, the Dark Eldar Druhkari savants that exist out there in competitive play, is because monsters, Slanesh and stuff like that, have just been running all over them. They have a really bad matchup against demons. They have a really bad matchup against armies that use a lot of monster characters, because they just don't have a lot of ways to deal with those units. So these are monsters themselves. They're pretty decent in combat. They have strength 8, damage 3, -3 AP weapons, or -2 AP, I should say, which can go up to -3 with the pain tokens. So they are very powerful at both shooting and combat. They have good Overwatch too, with 2 twin-linked flamers, which have AP -1. So these guys are definitely an S tier unit. I love them in Reaper's Wager. I love that you can give them an advance and charge strat, which kind of mitigates their slow speed. And, you know, on top of it all, you can also give them sustained hits if you want some extra Haywire damage. So they're really good. They're really good in Reaper's Wager. And I think they're also really good in Real Space Raid, and they're probably pretty decent in Sky Splinter as well. Okay, moving on to the Quins units. We have a couple of Quins units here. I'm actually going to just go over all the Quins units all together for you guys. in one blast here, because I think that's probably the best way to do it. So we're going to first talk about the Death Jester. So the Death Jester is way better now in the Druhkari list because he's a little bit cheaper and he has the same abilities as before. So with the one exception that you can take multiple Death Jesters and they can be okay. Now, I believe in Reaper's Wager, you may be able to take multiple Harlequin units. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think that that's going to be the case. Because I don't think there's a, real limit to them anymore. But correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section if they didn't change that. I think the latest FAQ allowed them to be taken in Reaper's Wager, maybe in unlimited amounts, but correct me if I'm wrong. So even if you can't, I think one of these guys is really good. Just being able to, just be alone up, being able to shoot with rerolls ones to hit is good, especially in this detachment, because the Harlequins are mostly going to be losing the wager because your Dark Eldar units are going to be doing the most damage. So I would rate this guy, I'd rate him A tier because he is a lone op. He doesn't do incredible amounts of damage, but he does enough damage to where he can plink off wounds here and there, cause battle shock, force enemies to take battle shock tests, which is going to give you more pain tokens. He's definitely more useful in the Reaper's Wager than he is in any of the Eldari detachments, aside from the Harlequin detachment. So I'm going to put him in A tier because I do think he's very solid. Then we have the Troupe. Now, the Troupe got more expensive, but it also got way better. It now just has Dev Wounds base. So running just the Troupe by itself is not a bad thing. You can also choose between 3 different abilities. And there's also this cool thing that you can do now with Reaper's Wager. And that is, if you get charged, right? If your Harlequin unit gets charged, you can not only -1 to hit on them, but also -1 to wound. Because of the stratagem in Reaper's Wager that allows for that. So this unit right here can become quite durable. Also, being able to advance in charge or gain sustained hits on weapons that have dev wounds is absolutely insane. Gotta put these guys in A tier as well. They're amazing in the detachment. They're really good value. They're cheap enough to where they compete with things like Incubi and Witches and stuff like that, and they hit way harder, and they are much more durable and are able to, hop in and out of transports and stuff like that. So I think this is a great unit for the Reaper's Wager. Gotta give it an A tier. And also, all their weapons got increased, right? Their Neurodisruptors got better, their fusion pistols got better. This is just an all-round better unit now. Then, of course, we have the Troupe Master, and he's also insane. I would actually put him in S tier. I think you need a Troupe Master in your lists now just because of the fact that he does so much damage on a personal level. If you can get access to sustained hits, it's amazing, right? You get sustained hits on him. You're re-rolling ones to hit via his ability, and the weapon has damage too. His Power Sword or his Troupe Master's Blade is very powerful in combat. So between the Troupe and the Troupe Master, you are doing a bunch of dev wound damage to any kind of target. And I think this shores up a huge weakness in the Druhkari lineup, which is monsters, right? Typically speaking, Druhkari cannot deal effectively with monsters. So the Troupe Master helps out with this because he gives the unit the Troupe Master has a ton of damage himself. And the Troupe unit itself has +1 to wound and has dev wounds with its weapons, plus the fusion pistols, plus the grenades that they can throw in. It just becomes a dev wound dealing machine. And I think this is really a combination that needs to be run in the Reaper's Wager. My lists are going to start including a Troupe Master, a Troupe, and a Star Weaver for some mobility. And I think this is really the way that you want to run Harlequin combat in a Druhkari list. Okay, next on the lineup is the Shadow Seer. The Shadow Seer is unfortunately going to be a B tier unit. It's not really that it's a bad model. It's just, it's not particularly useful for what Reaper's Wager wants to do, which is attack the enemy very aggressively. The Reaper's Wager is a very aggressive style list, and the Shadow Seer is a more defensive character. So I don't think the Shadow Seer really fits in well with the theme of Reaper's Wager. I mean, it's definitely not useless. You can give it the ability to infiltrate with its unit. A lot of people love, infiltrating a squad of 10 Harlequins with the Shadow Seer. That's definitely something you can do, which is fine. But the problem is that, you know, giving your enemy's weapons hazardous isn't that useful on a unit that wants to kill your opponent dead before they get to attack. And if somebody strikes you and attacks you, yeah, you're giving them hazardous, but you're also giving them a lot of points, right? The Harlequins did get increased in points, so that unit is going to be more expensive. The Shadow Seer with the upgrade is going to be pretty expensive. So you're losing a fairly big unit if somebody charges you, and if you charge somebody else, the Troupe Master just 9 times out of 10 going to be the better aggressive option. So I kind of have to say the Shadow Seer is a little bit lackluster. However, if you do plan on running more heavy into Quins and you can't take more than one Troupe Master, which now that I think about it, I think they are still limited to 1 Troupe Master, 1 Shadow Seer, 1 Death Jester, 1 Solitaire in the Reaper's Wager. You know, now that my mind is kind of remembering the restrictions there, I think if you're going to run a second troop, you might as well just use the Shadow Seer, but it's definitely a poor man's Troupe Master. If you could have 2 Troupe Masters, you would, but I don't think it's possible. Again, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But yeah, Shadow Seer, just average character. It's kind of like Yurian. Personally, when I used the Shadow Seer, I was underwhelmed by what it did in my games. Even in the Harlequin detachment, I thought it was underwhelming, so I can only imagine, you know, in a detachment that doesn't have quite the amount of support for Quinn's units, that it would be a little bit lackluster. All right, next up is the Solitaire. This is an auto-include. You definitely want a Solitaire in your army. Regardless, the Solitaire did get buffed in the Codex, so it doesn't seem like it, but going from 3 wounds to 4 wounds is a buff, because grenade stratagems now do not automatically kill the Solitaire. Your opponent has to get a little bit lucky to kill it with a single grenade. So what that means is your opponent's going to have to activate a little bit harder to be able to kill this guy. Probably still be able to kill him, but, you know, just that little bit of extra durability can help you, for sure. So I definitely like the Solitaire anyway, because being able to reroll 1s to hit and 1s to wound against targets that it's already pretty much wounding on 2+, or hitting on 2+ and wounding on 3+ most of the time, is very strong. And it's a strong assassination character if you need something to really die. So, you know, I love the Solitaire personally. I think it's a great include in any Reaper's Wager list. Okay, let's talk about the Star Weaver. Star Weaver is going to be an A-tier model just because it's good. It's not terrible. It allows the Harlequin troop and the Troupe Master and stuff to reactivate multiple times if it hides well. It will die to a stiff breeze, but it is much stronger than before. You know, being able to kind of, you know, bring units in and out of the battlefield is very strong. And yeah, it's still A tier. It's still good. 2 shuriken cannons with lethal hits. That's really the thing that I think makes it better than before in Reaper's Wagers. Again, Reaper's Wager has trouble versus monsters, and now shuriken cannons have lethal hits, so now you have something that can maybe punch a couple wounds into a monster here and there, which is not bad. Whereas before, you were lucky to actually have this thing punch into monsters at all. Next up is its cousin, the Void Weaver. The Void Weaver is, I hate to say it, but it's probably a unit that is a little bit outclassed in this detachment. So this detachment's very aggressive. It wants to do a lot of damage very quickly. This is 125 points. For something that honestly doesn't do a lot of damage, you're much better off taking something like a Ravager for anti-large, anti-tank, and stuff like that. This weapon platform really just doesn't do a whole lot for you. The Lone Op is nice. The Lone Op 18 is nice. But again, as an aggressive detachment, oftentimes leaving a bunch of your units in the backfield is not a good idea. Maybe take one of these, you know, if you really need something to stay on a home objective that's immune to Overwatch or something like that, this could work. But, you know, at the same time, you have access to Kabalite Warriors, you have access to other stuff that can easily do that for you, right? Like the Death Jester can sit on an objective and have Lone Op. It's not that big of a deal. And I just think the Void Weaver is a little bit outclassed. Its damage isn't great, even with rerolls 1s to hit and wound. I just think my mind has changed on this thing because also it lost the Battle Shock ability. So it no longer causes Battle Shock to units that it shoots at. So one of the big reasons why I kind of liked this thing in the Reaper's Wager is because it was also utility. It also did Battle Shock damage. It could kill light stuff. It could, you know, kind of kill light infantry in the midboard early on in the game. And it was cheaper. It was only 100 and I think 15 points or 110 points, something like that, in the index, and it just, in my opinion, worked better. I think the 18-inch lone op is completely wasted on this thing, and it's just not a good ability. So it went from being, you know, B tier kind of, or more towards A tier for me personally, all the way to C tier. It's not good. It doesn't fit well with the detachments theme and playstyle. Okay, so those are most of the Harlequin units. I think we have one more here. We're just going to go ahead and do the last Harlequin unit, which is the Skyweavers. They're going to be an A-tier unit. I know some people might be thinking, oh, but Proxy Hammer, their damage is so bad now. They don't get the reroll 1 to hit and wound. Well, they weren't doing that anyway, and they do get rerolls 1s to hit and to wound. It's not a single reroll to hit and wound like in the index, but they do get some rerolls, which is good in this detachment, and their combat is much better. Their Zephyr Glaives are much improved. Their Zephyr Glaives used to suck in combat. Now they're actually really good, and these guys have a native -1 to hit now. So again, you stack that with the -1 to wound that they have. These are 3 wound models with 3 wounds apiece. In Reaper's Wager, they all of a sudden become a pretty durable unit. And I really like these guys for 95 points. I think they're a solid pick in any Reaper's Wager list. Having a couple of units of these to deal with, you know, tanks and stuff isn't a bad thing. You know, their comparison to Scourges, when you compare them to Scourges, it might seem like these guys are just a worse option. But Scourges are more expensive by 40 or 35 points. So if you do need a unit that can just, you know, chip off a couple wounds off a vehicle here and there, this is the unit you want. Typically speaking, you're going to be running these alongside Talos anyway, which are also going to have Haywire Blasters. So, you know, you pretty much have your anti-vehicle covered between those two units. Obviously, if these are your only anti-vehicle option, maybe you just have one unit of these for some utility and some damage and some flexibility. Then you're probably going to have 2 units of Dark Lance Scourges as well in your list, which can also work pretty well in the Reaper's Wager, just as a general unit that's good. Right? Scourges are just a good unit, which we'll get into in just a second. Okay, so the Witches. Witches are good. You know, I think they're A tier in this detachment. First of all, they got cheaper. They're now 80 points for 10, which is absolutely insane for the kind of damage that they can deal. You can give them lethal hits. You can give them sustained hits. They get sustained hits anyway with the Succubus, which is really strong. And they're really cheap now. They're only 40 points for a half squad. So if you buy a Venom for them, it's only a 40-point unit, which is excellent for scoring objectives, for locking units in combat, and generally just being an absolute pain in your opponent's ass. Witches are a very good unit. They're very efficient, and I think they're probably better in this detachment than other detachments. They're good in Sky Splinter, especially now with the points decrease, but they are good in Reaper's Wager as well. And yeah, I think they're a solid unit. I think you're going to have at least one of those units in your army anyway, because you need a lot of battle line in a Dark Eldar list. Okay, next up is Scourges. We're just talking about those. Scourges are A tier as well. They're not as good in this as they are in other detachments, but they're just a solid unit overall. You definitely want Scourges. They're going to be your, you know, move, shoot, move, hit something hard, and then retreat back into cover or behind ruin walls and stuff like that. So they are a very effective unit for a number of reasons. So I'm actually a big fan of Scourges. They can also get sustained hits 1 from the detachment, which is very good as well, right? Sustained hits 1 on weapons that can reroll their hit rolls is always very good. Okay, moving on from Scourges and going into the Void Raven Bomber. The Void Raven Bomber is really good in this detachment as well, but I'm going to put it in B tier. Now, the reason why, I definitely think it can work, but against a lot of shooting armies, it's just going to die when it comes in. It's going to go in, it's going to do its thing. It's extremely expensive, so it's probably not going to kill its points value unless it gets a little bit lucky. But if you do put the support into it, the stratagem for sustained hits 1 or whatever, and you get lucky with some Void Lances, you can well kill something that is at its weight class and points. However, you know, what is it going to do afterward? It's probably just going to get shot out of the sky, right? It's not very durable. It's very expensive. Doesn't give you any objective control whatsoever. Can't score secondaries. It's just purely for dealing damage. I think in a melee meta where you don't have a lot of units that can fly, it's very good, because, you know, no one can touch it basically, and everybody is going to be, you know, eschewing ranged weapons. They're not going to be taking ranged weapons in their list. But, you know, if you have an army that has any kind of range firepower, this thing is going to go down very quickly. So I just think it's situational. That's all. I think if you build a list around it, it can be good. But if you're just throwing it in your list just because, don't be surprised when it fails, because it needs very specific targeting to be effective. Okay. Next up is Drazhar. Drazhar is S tier. He's really strong, especially with Incubi in this detachment. You're not typically getting Lance when you come out of a transport with stuff, so putting this guy with Incubi does give them that +1 to wound, which is really strong. He kind of competes with the Archon a lot. I like him, but I don't know if he's better than the Archon, right? I think he's better than a second Archon. I just don't think he's better than the Archon himself for your Warlord choice. But he is still very good. He's more durable than the Archon overall. He doesn't rely on the Shadow Field. And he has really powerful attacks, which are better than the Archons against a wider array of targets. I do like him. I just don't think he's as good as your Warlord Archon that you're going to take with the detachment. So that's pretty much it. He's solid. Getting more battle focus tokens, pain tokens. Been playing too much Eldari lately. He gives you more pain tokens for killing a character once per game, which is also pretty cool. You know, it's a nifty little thing, nifty little extra, but it's not something that's game breaking or anything like that. Okay, on to Lilith. Lilith, she's S tier, guys. She's really hard to use, but she's really good. She has fights first, which makes her unit very powerful in the counter charge. She actually makes witches worth looking at in terms of damage. Just kind of like the Succubus that increases witches damage, but this girl is really good at it. She just absolutely murders infantry units, which is not something Dark Eldar typically struggle with, and the reason being is because we have units that have a lot of anti-infantry, but more importantly, because of Lilith herself. The reason Dark Eldar have that reputation at killing infantry is partially due to Lilith, just being able to charge into a unit of, 10 Marines and butcher every single last one of them. So she's really good, and probably more of an auto include in this type of list as well, because she's re-rolling 1s to hit in this list and 1s to wound, which is insane considering she has anti-infantry 3+. And oftentimes she's just going to be dumping a bunch of attacks on you on her mini feat turn. Really good model. And obviously having fights first for heroic intervention is insane. Okay, next up we have the Ravager. The Ravager is a pretty solid pick here, but, the Ravager's probably going to be kind of a little bit lower on the list just because this type of list, I don't think the Ravager's that good in it. This is really more of a combat-oriented army. You want to be into combat, you want to be quick, you want to be able to get to the enemy quickly, and the Ravager doesn't really fit the bill. I think the Ravager is good, but at the end of the day, it's just 3 Dark Lances, and 3 Dark Lances bounce a hell of a lot more often than you would think. And personally speaking, I just don't really prefer it. I just don't really like it personally. I've used the Ravager in several lists. I think it's way better in Sky Splinter Assault. I think if you're playing Sky Splinter, you definitely want one of these. Is this even the Ravager or is this the Raider? Now that I'm looking at the picture. Okay, I think the picture is wrong, but let's just say it's a Ravager, okay? They basically are the same model. So yeah, I think sustained hits 1 can be good, but when you're talking about only having 3 attacks, versus 4 of the Scourges, you're paying a little more for the Scourges, but you're also much more safe from enemy fire with Scourges. So I have to say overall, Scourges are better. Ravager's good, but Scourges are better. Okay, on to the Wracks. The Wracks they're B tier. They're okay. I would rate them kind of the same as Yurian. I know a lot of people use them for that extra pain token. They did get cheaper at 55 points, so there is that. But they don't have Infiltrate. They don't have Scout. They just basically give you a pain token. Their damage themselves is really weak. They have weak damage. They have weak durability. And I just feel like the unit is just meant to die. But in a way in which you could basically have other units do the same thing for cheaper, right? Like, you could take a unit of Witches now for 80 points and half the unit's worth 40. That's more sacrificial than a unit of Wracks. And I know Wracks are sometimes just put in lists because you have nothing else to buy with it. Your alternatives are not good. But I still don't think that makes Wracks a good unit. I just think it makes them a filler unit that can do something, right? Because they do give you a pain token when they die. If they do manage to kill something, which is very rare, they will also get a pain token. But the unit is not overall that great, in my honest opinion. And that's why you don't see Dark Eldar players taking more than 1 or 2 units of these. Sometimes Usually just one. I don't think many players actually take 2 units of Wracks unless they're trying to do something insane. But yeah, Wracks just not that good in my opinion. The next up is the Beastmaster and the Beast Pack. This is obviously an S tier unit. Very effective unit that's good at a number of things. Scout is insane with this unit, Scout 9. And then they have a high movement on top of that. They can move through walls because they are beasts. They are not mounted, they are beasts. So they can move through ruins and stuff like that, which is really good. And on top of it all, with lethal hits or sustained hits as an option for them, that could be really strong when they get into combat. Because the Beast Pack, the problem with the Beast Pack is, it doesn't do a lot of damage against heavy stuff, but if you throw lethal hits on them, all of a sudden this unit, re-rolling the hit rolls of 1 when they charge in, of course you can always empower them. They can re-roll charge rolls. They have a ton of attacks. So those ton of attacks with lethals, re-rolling hits can do a significant amount of damage to pretty much any target in the game. So I got to give this unit an S tier rating. It is an absolute auto-include in most Druhkari lists, and it's no different here. Okay, next up, we have the Succubus. The Succubus is going to be, I'm going to say B tier. The reason why it's B tier, guys, it's not because I don't like the I think the Succubus is fine. She's just a poor man's Lilith. If you can't afford Lilith for 85 points or 90 points or whatever she is, then you have a Succubus for 45. She's cheap. She does decent anti-infantry damage. She attaches to witches. She boosts their damage a little bit. And I just think that she's a little bit weaker because she doesn't do much, you know? She only gives fights first to the unit if you give them a pain token, which is good. But she doesn't do a whole lot of damage. She doesn't improve the unit's damage against the targets that matter. So, like, if a Space Marine squad charges you or something, you know, a little bit heavier, the Succubus can't really do much to stop them because she only has 6 attacks with damage 1. So she's not going to be killing that many Marines. And her unit is not going to be killing that many Marines as well. So she is good, don't get me wrong. I just don't think she's that good. So I'm going to put her in B tier. Okay, Venom time. Venom is A tier. Why is the Venom A tier? Well, it's basically an army staple, right? You need Venoms to be able to transport your witches, your Kabalite Warriors, your Incubi, all those kind of things. It's a great transport. It's just like the Star Weaver, except it's less durable than the Star Weaver. But the alternative is it's a little bit cheaper, and, you know, it carries Dark Eldar units, essentially. It has the same ability as the Star Weaver. You can hop back into it at the end of the assault phase or, you know, fight phase or whatever, the end of the turn. So it's a great way to keep your units activating for a longer period of time. That's about it. That's kind of all it does. Comes with 2 splinter cannons, which are good against infantry, but nowhere close to as viable or as good as the, you know, classic shuriken cannon. Okay, next up is the regular Homunculus. He's C tier, doesn't do anything for the army, basically. He's only for a unit of Wracks. Doesn't really have a lot of utility. I just hate him. Overall, I just think he sucks. I think if you put him in a unit of Grotesques, if you could put him in Grotesques, he'd be awesome because he'd give them Feel No Pain Port 4+. But unfortunately, he just doesn't do that, right? So, in my honest opinion, he's C tier. He's nothing to, you know, kind of write home about. He can only join Wracks, and he's not cheap enough to be taken alone for some sort of solo kind of character. Okay, we have Mandrakes next. Mandrakes, guys, S tier. They're a great scoring unit. They have good, decent shooting with dev wounds, so they can do good chip damage. They have decent combat as well. They can duel with other kind of light targets and stuff, you know, stealth suits or, you know, scouts or anything like that. They can do pretty decent damage against. They probably don't win that fight against scouts, but they do a significant amount of damage. And between shooting and combat, they can probably beat out a unit of scouts for a middle objective or a side objective or something early on in the game to score you some points. And yeah, I just think the unit's very decent. Having an uppy-downy ability as well is extremely good for scoring, and every army that has that ability or unit with that ability definitely usually takes it if it's pretty cheap like this. So they're obviously going to go in S tier for your secondary points. We next have the Cronos. The Cronos is S tier as well. Why is it S tier? It's cheap. It's really cheap for the cost, and it's very tough for the cost. And it supports your army. It lets you regenerate pain tokens, which is really important for keeping your list alive and keeping your list doing damage. So Dark Eldar, basically how they operate is The reason they are sometimes survivable is because they're able to kill more units of your opponents than they are of yours. And one of the reasons they can keep doing this throughout the battle and not run out of steam is because of the Cronos. So the Cronos allows you to kind of, score secondary objectives, but also regenerate your pain tokens. Really good model. It's basically at the center of every Druhkari list is at least one of these guys. So they're definitely going to be S tier. They're fantastic. Also, they have a pretty decent range attack option as well. So there is that. Okay, next up is the Razorwing jetfighter. That's going to be a C tier unit. Why? It just doesn't have enough firepower. Truly, it's kind of cheap, but doesn't have enough firepower to be really effective against ground targets. It does have its missiles or whatever, but typically speaking, it's going to come in, it's going to hit an infantry unit, maybe a 5 Marine squad. It's going to kill most of the Marines in the squad, and then it's just going to die a horrible death. So you're trading a 160-point flyer for a unit of 5 Marines. It just doesn't feel good, and typically speaking, it's just not going to be able to trade up against most other targets. So definitely C tier unit, not much to say else there. Next up, we have Incubi. Incubi are S tier as well. They're really good. You put lethals or sustained on this unit, and they just go hog wild on your opponent. Really strong unit with really good abilities for the army. Forcing battle shock tests, can regenerate your pain tokens. These guys do a lot of damage against Marines. These guys compete with the Harlequins as far as the amount of damage they can do. Now, the only reason I put these guys in S and not in A with Harlequins is because these guys can attach to an Archon, and an Archon allows them to reroll wounds as well. So reroll all hits and all wounds. The only reason why these Harlequins are here is because they don't reroll all hits with the pain tokens, right? Harlequin units cannot take pain tokens. Incubi can. And that's what pushes them over the edge, I think, in this matchup. So Incubi, definitely an auto-include in your list. You'll probably want at least 1 or 2 of those units in your army. All right, now we have Kabalite Warriors. Kabalite Warriors are A tier. They're a really solid unit. Again, with lethals or sustained hits, they become much more hard-hitting. But more importantly, they give you objective control, right? They give you that OC. They give you sticky objectives. They give you, cheap bodies to throw around on the battlefield to screen or do whatever with. And that's really where they come in handy. They are very cheap now at 100 points a unit, which I think is actually probably a little too cheap for them, to be honest. I don't know why they buffed these guys and not like other units in the army. But, there it is. They buffed Kabalite Warriors. So at 100 points a unit, they're very effective, and they're very effective in both Venoms and Raiders. Typically speaking, though, there's only 2 ways to run them. In a Venom, all the special weapons in a Venom is a little gunboat, or with an Archon and a Court of the Archon to make that Uber Death Star Strikes First unit that is really strong in combat. And in Reaper's Wager, by the way, you can give them sustained hits. So you're charging in with sustained hits and lethal hits, which is really, really a powerful combo. Okay, next up is Grotesques. Nothing changed with them, guys. They're great. A tier. I love Grotesques. Being able to advance and charge with these guys and shoot is awesome. They have liquefier guns, so they have flamers. You take a unit of 6 of these guys, they can move forward, advance, with a reroll to advance, because remember, you have pain tokens for that. And they can shoot and then charge your opponent. And this is really what they were missing in the 2 other detachments, both the Real Space Raid and the Sky Splinter, host or whatever, the Sky Splinter detachment, because they are not mobile. They are not a fast unit. You can't really effectively take them in transports as well because it limits the squad size. So they need some sort of support. And also, this unit is going to be your primary objective unit, which means essentially the Dark Eldar, they struggle with primaries. You guys know this. They're not very tough. So they need units like Talos and Grotesques to hold up that primary objective game. And these guys do it very well. So you have a couple of units of Talos, a unit of Grotesques, and your primary game is covered very well. Very solid unit. Okay. Next is the Tantalus. It's a Legends unit. We're not going to go over this. It's not good. It wasn't good before in a lot of situations. I know people liked it, but truthfully, it was a massive model. Really had a lot of trouble hiding. And I think there was only like 1 or 2 builds with this thing that were successful. I think it's okay in this detachment. I just think it's better in Sky Splinter, where you can give it a 4+ invul save with Night Shield and stuff. So I just don't think it's a very good Reaper's Wager model, but it was a good model for Sky Splinter. But, you know, it's also kind of a unit that is a little troll and not, like, that good. That's my honest opinion. But, you know, again, I haven't really tried it out. I've just kind of moved it around on Tabletop Simulator with the GW train. It just doesn't seem to move that fast. So I was just like, you know, I don't see the use of this thing. It doesn't seem to do a ton of damage. And a lot of its damage, weirdly, is in close combat. So, I don't know. It was just never my bag. But it's a Legends now, unfortunately. So, yeah, it's sticking in D tier. Lastly is Hellions. Hellions are another A tier unit. They're great. These guys needed something to be viable, and I think Advance and Charge and lethal hits potentially gives them that. They already have sustained hits, so when they charge in, they're doing lethal hits and sustained hits at strength 4, re-rolling hits because of the pain token, obviously. They're getting extra AP. These guys are hitting like absolute trucks in close combat. They're also pretty durable, right? They have 2 wounds apiece. They only have, you know, basically a 5-up save, which is not great. But they hit so hard that even a unit of 5 can clear out a unit of Marines, which is really strong. And they're not that expensive. They're actually fairly cheap. I think they're like, what, 80 points now? Something like that. Or 75 points. They're not expensive at all. So I do think they're a very good unit. And they have a decent shooting attack as well. You know, some splinter pods. It's not great, but it's basically a splinter rifle that has assault, which is nice, which kind of goes in with your advanced shoot and charge thing. And yeah, they're a great unit. They're an aggressive unit that is very good in combat, and it's amazing. So basically, Reaper's Wager is so cool of an attack. I think it's super cool because you can take so many different units and they can all be effective, right? You can take Grotesques in this detachment. They're good in this. They're not good in other detachments. You can take Hellions, which aren't good in other detachments. You can take, you know, Witches, which are good in other detachments, but they're really good in this detachment because they can get lethal hits, right? And so many more units that you can take in this detachment that just don't work in other Druhkari detachments. This detachment has a lot of flavor, has a lot of fun to it. There's a lot of cool tricks that you can do with it. And I think that it's just an amazing detachment overall. So hope you guys enjoyed the tier list. And let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I think truly this is pretty close to what I think is reasonable for this detachment. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. And if you do want to continue to support the channel via Patreon, I will leave that link in the description for you guys. You know, any little bit helps. But more importantly, for free, you'll get access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar and Dark Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategies, tactics, and of course, hobbying. And I will leave the link in the description below for that. I'm also an Amazon affiliate. I have an updated Amazon affiliate link with a bunch of the new Eldar stuff that, you know, is available on Amazon now. And lastly, I will leave my channel store page a link in case you want to grab some Eldar or, you know, there's a tiny bit of Dark Eldar inspired apparel on there as well. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.